Hello, I'm Patrick. This is my grandmother, Kathy
Hey,
Barbella.
louder.
Okay. Just tell me a bit about yourself.
Oh, I
Speak
have,
up.
I have 4 children. I have 8 great grandchildren and 8 grandchildren and 2 great grandchildren. And this is one of my youngest grandsons, Patrick.
So, where were you born? Where'd you
So
grow
I
up?
was born in Liverpool, England, the north of England, back in 1938. And I travelled around England a little bit, got to see Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and but then I wanted to go a bit further, so I wanted to come out and see. I had some uncles who were merchant seamen, and they'd been to America a lot of times. They used to come back and tell me these stories, so I always wanted to go. And so I decided that I would get a job as a nanny in New York, and I applied for it. And it took me about 2 years to be able to come over to America and fill out a lot of forms. I had to have medical forms, and then I had to go down to see the American ambassador, who happened to have an office then in Liverpool, England, but it's not there now, it's only in London. And I swore not to be a parasite on America. And he was very funny. He had a Mickey Mouse tire. I can always remember that. And so I took the trip. My family were very upset, because they thought I was coming. They were upset, but my dad was. They really did me want. Well, I was in my early 20s, but I wanted a little adventure, and I came. But I had to jump through a lot of hoops to come here, and so I had a home and I had a job. So I did that for about a year, and in the meantime I met my husband, and his name was Anthony Barbella, and we got married in 1964, and then I was home for about. We lived in New York because my husband's family had a bakery, an Italian bakery, Huntington, New York. And we decided to come to Arizona. His 2 brothers came with us and their wives, but they went back. They didn't want to stay here, but we stayed here. We took a trip back to England to see, did we want to stay there? We were going to buy a business there, but I wanted to come back to America. And we went down to Florida, but then we settled on Arizona. And then I raised my 4 children. They went to Navajo School in Scottsdale, and my eldest daughter was one of the last ones to graduate from Scottsdale High School, and the others went to Saguaro. And I worked. After I got down here, I got a job with one of the credit card companies, and I worked about 30 years until I retired at 68. And in the meantime, I had 8 grandchildren, which I've enjoyed thoroughly. I have 5 grandsons and 3 granddaughters. We take turns having holidays at different homes. And I'm 87 now, but I look back and God's been good to me, health-wise, and I still get to see my grandsons, and it's a good life.
Did you face any difficulties immigrating to America?
Any difficulties? No, not really. They asked me about when I went to see the ambassador, the American ambassador. He wanted to know who made the laws in America. And he was only looking for one word, Congress. But I gave him a whole, where the rules were made and who and the voting. And then he laughed and he said, no, we just want one word, and that was Congress. I can remember that. and and then, you know, it was soon after that, then I got my visa to be able to come here and work here. And then I got a green card. And for the first few years, I had to go to the closest police station and show them my green card and that I was still working and taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, I think it was back in the 80s, 84, maybe something like that, I had to study again to become an American citizen, and which I did, and I do have my papers where I became an American citizen. You know, I mostly stayed up with my family. I do have some friends,
Mm-hmm.
American, but you know, I do miss the English culture,
Mm-hmm.
and some of it I didn't always fit in, and it was a bit hard to make friends. But my family was my life, and so you know, my husband and I, we had our hard times, especially when we just came down to Arizona on our own. It was like immigrating again with 4 children, and we both had to take jobs, and we worked ourselves up from then. But I'm happy to say I've never been a parasite, and I've never taken a penny, you know, other than the Social Security, which I paid in for. And I thank you. I've always had my feet on the ground, and we've always come out smiling. So, you know, there was difficult times. There was difficult times raising 4 teenagers. It, you know, just like anybody else, any other family.
Was it a bit of a culture shock coming to America? Was it very different from England?
One of the first culture shocks was the bread.
Mm.
And I had breakfast the first morning I got it, and I had a piece of bread with it, and it felt like I was having a piece of cake because it was so sweet
Oh.
to American, you know, to English. And that's why I've always liked kind of sourdough bread. So that was a bit of a culture shock. The snow in Long Island was a subculture shock too.
Mm-hmm.
The first Christmas I was here, I did have a relative, or distant relatives that lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they invited me. They heard I was here, and they invited me, and they were the neighbors that I was living amongst at that time were very friendly and very helpful. And this one lady took me all down to New York, and she took me all around New York. And then there was another memory where then she took me down into New York to get the Greyhound bus. And I took it all the way over from New York to Pittsburgh. And the snow was just coming down and coming down. And by the time we got there, it was deep, and it was very, very late. So that was my first Christmas in America. So some of those were culture shocks. I wish I could remember more now, but there is differences that I've come up against that, you know, I sometimes still with my family, and I'm English, and I still want my English ways, and they didn't, you know.
Yeah.
My kids sometimes said, I wish you were American, mother. You'd understand better.
Was it hard staying in touch with your family?
It was at that time. I wish we had Facebook and FaceTime when my kids were babies. I would have loved it, you know, to show my mom and dad as they grow up, the way we can now. And I keep in touch with all my sisters through FaceTime now. So I sometimes go back into my very English accent because I'm talking with them. But I did get to see them when we were in New York. I took the children back to England, and my mother and father, I was able to send money and bring them to America, which was one of my joys. My dad coming to New York, and he'd always wanted to, but didn't think he'd be able to afford it. And that was very different times back than the times now, so you may not understand that. But my mom and dad came, and you know, we went back there with my husband, and we saw the family. We were able to go back and forth a little bit from New York as we came to Arizona. I was here then 12 years before I could go back to England because I was raising 4 teenagers and the children and working. So, but then we managed to go back, my husband and I, and we did a lot of Europe. I took him all over Italy, which his mother was from Italy, and we did a tour of Italy. We did Spain. We did France. I enjoyed those.
Yeah.
So.
Did you write letters to them back then?
Oh,
or?
then I used to sit down and write it, and I have some of the letters, and they used to be the old email letters, and yeah, it was hard. It was hard having 4 babies and trying to keep up with the writing because the phones, you know, if I managed to call over, and it was only when somebody died or something, they would call me on the phone, and then I tried to get them from the wall phones and talk. Those were hard times when things were happening over there, and you know, and I was over here, but I did manage to go back to see my dad's funeral and my mother's funeral. So I used to get telegrams from them when something really bad happened, and those would be hard times. But, you know, I think I made a good choice. And, you know, living in Arizona now, and I'm still, you know, 87, taking care of myself. And I'm still in my own home at the moment, but I don't know how long that will last. And so I can only tell you, but there was times when, you know, it was very hard, and I missed home, and I missed the culture and the different things that they did and the way they did it in America, and especially my husband's family being Italian. It was very different. But, you know, I've always been able to fit in. And it was great that when my dad came and saw me here, and we had dinner at my mother-in-law's house, and I realized how hard it was for him to let me go, because he said, you know, she didn't have to come here. She had a good home and a good job. And I realized how much it must have hurt me leaving home, but I just had so much adventurous in that I just wanted to travel and see, you know, but I didn't get very far then after I met my husband. So I got stopped in New York, but no regrets.
Is there any advice you would give to somebody who's thinking about immigrating to another country or to America?
Any advice? Well, you know, you've got to, I remember another English girl I met when I was here, but she was complaining once about, you know, what we do in England and what we, and somebody stood up and said, well, you're not in England right now, so, you know. And I'm glad she said it, not me, because that was the truth. You're the one that's coming to the other country, and you're the one who's got to fit in, and you're the one that's, you know, they're not going to your country, so you have to fit your culture into their ways and do the American way. You know, there's so many people like my accent, and so many people wanted to hear it, but my way of life in England, and that was nice. But you do have to, you've got to remember that you are the one that immigrated or came to this country, and so you've got to look at it that way, and you're the one that's got to fit in.
Okay. Well, thanks for doing the interview with me, Nana.
You're very welcome.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is one of my favorite grandsons. Look, that's the end result.